Hey guys, let's slip into a place where one misplaced inch of fabric could permanently stain your standing. You find yourself in a bedroom in mid-19th century England. The hearth's warmth disappeared hours ago. The air is cold, and you're preparing for the corset, the 5 petticoats, the stockings, the gloves, and the hat. Yet before that, a silent code hangs over you like a thick rope. Your ankle must remain unseen by anyone. You won't believe this, but your neighbour can't see them. No passing coachman gets a glimpse. Not even the breeze is permitted a peek. Victorian society considered ankles wildly seductive. That's right, ankles. Forget exposed shoulders or plunging necklines. Just that subtle bone curve above your boot could trigger scandal, ignite rumours, and question a woman's character. Before we go further, go ahead and hit that subscribe button if you're enjoying this. And drop a comment telling me where you're tuning in from tonight. What time is it where you are? Lower those lights, switch on that fan for atmosphere, and let's begin this exploration together. You pull on your stockings before dawn breaks. They're pale, delicately woven, reaching high enough to disappear under your bloomers and petticoats. You're careful not to stretch them too tight. Any bunching or slipping could get noticed, and when someone notices, the whispers begin. Outside, smoky, tea-scented air drifts by. You inhale shallowly and slide your foot carefully into the heeled leather boot. 20 minuscule buttons run along its side, so tiny you need a special hook device. This isn't simply clothing, it's protection. Every layer separating your flesh from the world outside acts as armour against judgment. A glimpsed ankle meant, to Victorian eyes, practically showing your underclothes. You move down the stairs carefully. One careless motion, one swift lifting of your skirt showing too much, and the housemaid could see. She'd mention it to the cook, who'd inform the butcher. By week's end, your minister might preach a sermon with a veiled reference to you. And always remember the danger of breezy conditions. Sudden wind gusts pose your biggest risk. You've heard of women secretly stitching lead coins into their hems just for added weight. Some wear ankle-length bloomers with lacy edges that create a false impression of modesty should their outer skirt billow upward. You saw it happen once at a cousin's garden party. A young lady walked onto the pathway, tripped momentarily, and the breeze revealed her. Just a brief flash. Not even bare flesh, merely a white stocking. But it was sufficient. You remember the abrupt silence in conversation, 3 elderly relatives turning their heads like hawks. The girl turned crimson, nearly wept, and spent the rest of that afternoon claiming illness. She never received another invitation. And here's the peculiar part. While your ankles must stay hidden, your elbows, for mysterious reasons, are perfectly fine. Evening gowns reveal shoulders and upper arms, yet never the ankle. Victorians obviously had a remarkably narrow understanding of what qualified as provocative. So now, whenever you move, you do it slowly, carefully. You never rush upstairs. When someone walks behind you, you skip dancing with overly enthusiastic partners. Even entering a carriage demands strategic precision. You must collect your garments, assess the wind direction, and climb up gracefully without revealing a single inch of scandal. This transcends simple looks, it's about belonging. An exposed ankle doesn't merely make you seem improper, it marks you as an outsider, and being an outsider during this period is among the most dangerous positions a woman can hold. You grip your parasol tighter. The sun isn't even shining, but the parasol preserves appearances. Modest, composed, and entirely covered, you encounter the baker's wife on the street and give a slight nod. Not too low, not too friendly, and crucially, nothing in your gait raises the hem excessively. Because here, modesty isn't just virtue, it's survival itself. As you walk toward the dressmaker's establishment, you notice a girl, maybe 16 years old, sprinting across the muddy street with her skirt lifted high to dodge the puddles. It's just an instant, but you witness it. Her ankle is completely visible, covered in stockings, but undeniably there. And she's laughing. You stop, not from shock, but bewilderment. Why doesn't she feel afraid? The elderly woman beside you, possibly your aunt or morning companion, makes a disapproving noise. Girls nowadays, she mutters, barely whispering, yet carrying sufficient condemnation to break a grown man. You agree with a nod because you have no choice, but internally something awakens. It's not quite rebellion, nor exactly curiosity. It's something quieter, more subtle, jealousy. You're jealous of that girl's ankle, that fleeting taste of freedom, that capacity to laugh while her flesh challenges convention, even momentarily. But you understand you cannot permit yourself such indulgence. You were taught to know better, raised on narratives, not fairy tales, but warnings. You've heard of a distant cousin whose visible ankle resulted in withdrawn invitations, then disgrace, and ultimately being shipped away to some facility where correspondence never arrived. You know a neighbourhood girl whose engagement was cancelled because a guest witnessed her raising her skirts too hastily across a puddle. The groom's mother proclaimed it evidence of questionable character. This is your existence, a universe where ankles dictate whom you'll wed and where lace patterns can determine your social rank. But there's also a more sinister undercurrent. You've caught the whispers too, the ones traded by servants after nightfall. That certain gentlemen, respectable married ones, privately request glimpses of women's ankles, that they compensate for this privilege. That some entertainers and dancers are admired not for their talent, but for the scandalous brevity of their performance attire. It's all the same twisted mechanism. Public condemnation, private obsession. Your ankle must remain invisible by day, yet men will secretly fixate on it behind heavy drapes at night. You're meant to be oblivious to this, but naturally you aren't. So you straighten the ribbon on your wrist. You carefully tug your skirt down another half-inch before stepping into the shop. You move as though performing on a stage because essentially you are. Every instant is an examination. Are you modest enough? Controlled enough? Demure enough? But primarily, are you concealed enough? Inside the establishment, a new material captures your eye, striped in soft blue and cream. You momentarily imagine how beautiful it would look as a light summer gown. But then you think, will the hem fall low enough? What if you need to climb a garden step? What if the carriage encounters a rough spot? Might someone see? You abandon the idea and select the heavier wool mixture. It's less attractive, but it won't fail you. You can depend on it not to flutter in the wind or lift when you're seated. You can trust it to protect your secrets, to shield your ankles from the critical stares and vicious tongues of this society. By day's end, your feet throb, your boots squeeze, your posture has been rigid for hours, and your whole body feels constrained by invisible bonds. But your ankles stayed concealed, and in this world, that means you succeeded flawlessly. You're perched on the edge of an ornate chair, clutching a china plate in one gloved hand and a small silver fork in the other. Afternoon tea is underway, miniature sandwiches, delicate pastries, and fruit displayed like fine art. There's gentle chatter, an occasional cough into a handkerchief, and the persistent sound of porcelain touching porcelain. Across the table, a woman reaches gracefully for a pear slice. You start to do likewise, but your hand freezes mid-motion. On that same platter sits a perfectly ripened banana, and you absolutely cannot be the one to claim it. You discreetly survey the table. Has anyone touched it? Is it purely decorative? But no. The hostess, with unexpected enthusiasm, encourages you. Oh, you simply must sample the fruit, my darlings. Bananas, freshly imported this week. You hesitate. Though the banana is now commonplace in England, readily available thanks to shipping routes with the West Indies, its shape, texture, and the method one must employ to consume it have already earned it a dreadful reputation among proper women. You glance at your chaperone. She raises one eyebrow. That's all the caution you require. You withdraw to the safer option of a small tea biscuit. Here's the dilemma. Eating a banana demands too much intimacy. You must strip it, grasp it, bite into it, chew it, all while maintaining pleasant eye contact with others. Unthinkable. Not when the banana has quietly become a symbol of impropriety. Unspoken, naturally, but universally acknowledged. It's not documented in any official etiquette guide, but every woman recognizes that bananas, peaches, and other juicy fleshy fruits are best shunned in polite company. Some claim that the Queen herself once declined to have peaches served with skins attached, too messy, too suggestive. Others whisper that a performer was once driven from the stage for merely biting into a peach during a performance. A peach of all things, but the banana, it occupies its own realm of scandal, and it's not merely the act of consuming it, it's what that act implies, the shape, the softness, the gradual, deliberate peeling. It makes no difference if you're the most proper woman present. A single banana can obliterate years of meticulously maintained reputation. Even mixed fruit arrangements become dangerous ground. Some hostesses dice every piece into identical cubes just to prevent any unfortunate associations. Others drench the fruit in wine, claiming it's for preservation. But everyone knows it's so nobody will be tempted to lick the juice from their fingers. You release a quiet breath and reach for a dry cracker. Still, some small part of you questions, what if you were by yourself just once? Could you peel it slowly, boldly, even laugh while doing so? This environment doesn't allow such thoughts. You sip your tea and dismiss them. The woman beside you makes a catastrophic mistake. She lifts the banana with her gloved hand, peels it partially, and takes the smallest conceivable bite. She doesn't chew, she simply presses it between her teeth and swallows. The room grows noticeably quieter. It's sufficient. Someone coughs. A servant adjusts position in the corridor. Your chaperone stiffens, and though nobody speaks, you know the woman won't attend the next tea gathering. Later that evening, you're in the parlour with your mother and two of her card partners, listening to them trade subtle criticisms behind their lace fans. The subject inevitably circles back to that woman from the tea. "Did you see how she handled it?" one inquires. "Not even with a fork. No sense of propriety," another whispers, touching her lips, though she hasn't sipped anything for minutes. "Or decency." You nod, not because you concur, but because it's required. It's the price of remaining silent, of staying protected. You've discovered that here, even the consistency of a fruit can determine your moral character. Bananas aren't simply food. They're symbols, indicators, and trials. And failing that trial, even once, means risking exile from polite society. And it's not merely bananas. Peaches, mangoes, even figs. Each has its own subtle, suggestive stigma. Some say that a genuinely refined woman should only eat fruit that can be sliced into tidy pieces and lifted with a fork. Never anything requiring licking, peeling, or visible exertion in biting. The regulations aren't documented, but they're absorbed through careful social observation, like learning the steps of a treacherous dance. A girl named Margaret from Kensington, you remember, was once spotted biting into a nectarine on a garden bench. The juice dripped onto her wrist. She instinctively licked it away. 1 week afterward, she was engaged to a widower twice her years and quietly excluded from every luncheon invitation list you'd ever seen her name on. Coincidence, maybe? Or maybe someone's mother witnessed and took action. Because it's not solely about you. It's about your family, your sisters, your marriage prospects. The respectability of your whole household can be tarnished by a bite considered too forward. Your younger cousin once inquired innocently, "What's the matter with bananas?" She was 8. Your aunt appeared troubled and informed her, "They're for breakfast exclusively and only when you're at home." That concluded that conversation. The irony, naturally, is that men escape these restrictions. Your brother can devour 3 bananas in one go and be complimented for his hearty appetite. He can slurp fresh oysters, wipe plum juice from his hands, even loudly burp after a meal and remain considered a fine, marriageable gentleman. A bit crude, perhaps, but endearing. You, conversely, must control your mouth like a theatre curtain. Everything passing through it becomes a declaration of morality. Each bite is a rehearsed performance, each chew a display of restraint. And so you rehearse in your bedroom. You rehearse slicing a banana into pieces before eating it. You rehearse consuming peaches with a spoon, carefully scraping the flesh from the stone so you don't have to suck. You rehearse tucking a napkin beneath your wrist before raising fruit to your lips, all for the illusion of effortlessness, to appear as a woman who never struggles, never feels ravenous, never lets juice dribble down her chin. Eventually, you stop choosing fruit at social functions altogether. Too dangerous, too subject to misinterpretation. You learn to survive on dry cakes and polite conversation. And yet, in the stillness of your kitchen, long after the visitors have departed and your maid has been dismissed for the evening, you take a banana from the pantry. You peel it slowly, relishing the experience. You don't glance over your shoulder. You don't pause. You take a bite, and you laugh. Just once, just barely. And in that fleeting moment, your mouth is entirely yours. You're in the garden, dressed in your second-best walking outfit, still thick with layers, but at least it doesn't trail in the mud like the blue satin dress. The sun is agreeable, the hedges are precisely trimmed, and the scent of lavender floats from the flower beds. A small bird skips past you. You bend down just slightly to collect a dropped glove, and your knees naturally start to lower. Stop. You freeze. You can't. You must not squat. You immediately correct your stance, straightening your spine, legs pressed tightly together, your movement stiffly unnatural. A quick look confirms it. Nobody saw you. You exhale slowly. Crisis averted. Because in the world you occupy, the way you position your body is a statement of your virtue, and squatting, crouching, or anything that separates your legs even marginally is not simply ungraceful, it's considered indecent. There's a reason Victorian etiquette guides devote entire chapters to how a lady must sit. A woman must always maintain knees together, ankles crossed, and spine perfectly straight. And whatever happens, never place both feet flat on the ground. If your posterior is low, that's considered vulgar. That's the posture of the washerwoman beyond the fence. That's what children do when playing with twigs in the dirt. That's the posture of the help. You aren't a servant, you're a lady. Or at least, you're striving hard to be recognised as one. And that requires your body to stay vertical, compact, and regulated. No relaxing, no slumping, and absolutely no squatting. Even when you're by yourself, the rule remains. You've witnessed young girls scolded by their governesses for kneeling too deeply to retrieve a fallen book. One unfortunate cousin attempted to tie her shoe in the parlour, crouching like a beast, and was instructed to compose her limbs or risk impropriety. The expression haunts you. Compose your limbs, as though your arms and legs are unruly instruments threatening to explode into some wild melody at any second. In your home, there's a small bench near the entrance. Not for sitting, but for steadying one hand as you bend properly to adjust your skirt or fix your shoe. Always with dignity, always with one leg stretched backward as though you're about to salute the Queen herself. Sometimes it takes longer to tie a bootlace than to walk an entire block. But speed doesn't matter. Elegance is about containment, about stillness. You observe a young boy, maybe 12, chasing a rolling hoop down the rough street. He squats effortlessly to grab it, then immediately springs away, laughing. And you feel a strange sensation stir in your chest. Not quite longing, but a quiet kind of grief for a body that moves without any fear. Your body, in contrast, has become a collection of limitations. Wrapped in fabric and posture, everything is examined. A slouched back implies laziness. Legs apart implies immorality. Resting your elbow on a table is only acceptable in the privacy of your room, and only if you're writing melancholy poetry. You recall a tale once shared at a sewing circle. A young woman crouched down to feed a stray cat behind her home. A neighbour spotted her squatting, her skirt slightly above her knees, and sent an anonymous letter to her father. She was immediately prohibited from going out unescorted ever again. The cat, presumably, went hungry. The fear of your own knees becomes an instinctive reaction. You start to move like a machine, deliberate, straight, choreographed. Even when you're alone, your muscles remember the instructions. You balance on chair edges instead of sinking into them. You kneel on one knee exclusively, never both. You retrieve items by bending only at the waist like a rigid mechanical crane, rather than letting your body descend naturally to the ground. It's not about personal comfort, it's about maintaining control. There are layers below the surface, both of cloth and societal demands. Your outer garment limits you, certainly, but the corset turns your spinal column into an unyielding bar and your ribcage into a literal cage. With your middle severely tightened and your breathing restricted, it is physically painful to crouch or bend far. Trying to do so might rip the stitching, or worse, cause injury. One woman in Bath supposedly fractured 2 ribs after sitting carelessly on a very low stone bench. Another fell ill after bending low to evade the rain and letting her petticoats become wet. Whether these accounts are factual is unimportant. They are repeated like sacred texts, warnings to keep your limbs controlled and your natural impulses suppressed. Even the furnishings are meant to control you. The seats in respectable homes are intentionally made shallow, offering no chance to lounge or sink into them. Armchairs are narrow, backrests are rigid. Rocking chairs are associated with old servants and elderly women. Sofas are for sitting straight and sipping tea, not for napping, spreading out, or, heaven forbid, drawing your feet up beneath you. But it involves more than just posture. It is about placement. If you are sitting and your legs inadvertently move apart, even slightly, you feel terror rise within your chest. You know someone will notice, a mother, a governess, a stranger with a judgmental gaze. And even if they remain silent, they will not forget. Your character is established not by grand statements, but in fleeting moments like this. And so you fold yourself in day after day into the smallest possible form of yourself. Your back aches, your lower limbs throb, but you persist. Because spreading out is for gentlemen in their clubs, slumping is for homeless people on the street, and crouching is for wild animals. Still, in the garden, there are times, quick and spontaneous, when instinct momentarily overpowers image. Like when your dog drops his toy precisely at your feet, or when a daisy blooms just off the track, too flawless and small to ignore. And sometimes you yield. You bend, not fully, not noticeably, but just enough to grasp something on the earth, to feel your heels briefly touch the soil, to recall the sensation of unrestricted motion. You do not stay there for long, but the impression lingers. Later that night, in your bedroom, you will try it again. Not out of rebellion, but simple curiosity. You will secure the door, turn the key, and lower yourself slowly, observing your knees flex, your skirt spreading around you, your body adopting a position not allowed in polite company. You will feel strange, vulnerable, yet quietly powerful, and just before you rise, you will smile, because for one brief moment you occupied space the way your body was intended to. It is a dinner gathering at your cousin's house, pristine linen tablecloth, silver candle holders, polished utensils organised in perfect rows. You are seated at the long dining table between your aunt and a man you are hastily introduced to as Mr. Levington from Nottingham. His side hair shines with oil, and his waistcoat is clearly too small. But that is not your main worry tonight. Your worry is the chicken, specifically what to name its lower section. Because, as absurd as it may seem, you cannot utter the term leg. Not in this situation, not in front of men, not really in front of anyone. The word leg is considered too suggestive, too exposing of biology, too indecent. You look at the serving plates as the server slices the bird and you contemplate. Can you simply get away with pointing? You remember the directive your manners instructor emphasized. A woman must never directly mention extremities, underwear, or anything that causes the listener to picture her form beneath her attire. That rule includes lower limbs, undergarments, foundation wear, bosom, upper legs, and yes, even the term trousers. Your safest option tonight is to request a piece of the darker meat. That is the approved veiled language. If you make the error of saying leg, it might not cause an open scene, but you will notice the discomfort ripple. A look of disapproval, a quick glance away, a teacup suspended motionless in the air. It happened once to a young woman you knew, Agatha, bright, enthusiastic, just a little too honest. She was invited to Sunday dinner at a judge's residence. When asked for her preferred portion, she said cheerfully, "Oh, I much prefer a leg," and that was the end of it. The wife grew tense. The son choked on his beverage. Agatha was never invited back. You were too young to understand the gravity then. Now you understand the word conjured an image of her lower limbs, perhaps exposed, perhaps moving. And once that image enters a gentleman's consciousness, it cannot be removed. Which is why, even now, as you consume your soup, your vocabulary is tightly monitored, exactly like the clothing around your ribs. You do not talk about legs. You do not admit they exist, even on yourself. If you stumble, you lost your footing. If your hosiery tears, they are damaged below. If your underskirt rides up, you adjust your garments. This unspoken convention extends beyond dialogue. It influences how you move, how you sit, how you even perceive your own physique. Lower limbs become abstract ideas, mere hints. You possess them, of course, but you are never supposed to acknowledge it. Mr. Levington beside you speaks of his hunting trip. Caught a male deer by the hind leg, he states. You wince. Not because of the image of the creature, but because he said the term aloud, confidently, without a trace of embarrassment. Males are allowed this freedom. They can say leg, thigh, pants, even drawers, and it is seen as rugged, common masculine. You must ask for the lower portion, or simply say whatever you suggest. That is the tradition, and you perform it faultlessly. But this constant replacement of words, this display of polite terms, exhausts you. It is like navigating existence on your toes, your own speech a hidden minefield. One wrong word and you cease to be a lady. You become an invitation. Following the meal, you retire to the drawing room with the other ladies, while the gentlemen stay put, already lighting cigars and starting political discussions. The women gather around the small tea table. Conversation shifts from the price of lace trim to someone's child's forthcoming social introduction, and finally, as if pulled by gravity, to the near miss of the evening. Did you hear her? Naturally they all did. She almost said the word, one whispers, her lips barely moving. She reached for the chicken and then stopped herself. Clever girl, says another quickly, or rather quick to remain silent. The group offers brief, polite chuckles. You participate, though your smile feels rehearsed because you did almost utter it. You had felt the word forming right behind your lips. Leg. You had even felt the L sound, but you suppressed it just in time and instead requested the piece just above the wing. Secure, vague, and completely appropriate. This is what social gatherings have become. Not merely socializing, but a matter of preservation, a contest of exact phrasing, a continuous exercise in ambiguity. Even sitting with other women, even in areas without men, the regulations still govern you. You recall your maid, Anna. Earlier in the week, she hit her foot and shouted, "Blasted leg," before immediately covering her mouth. You had to gently correct her, though a part of you envied her directness. She doesn't dine with legal figures. She doesn't go to charity lunches. She is permitted to call her body parts what they are. You, conversely, are surrounded by women who refer to their lower limbs as nether portions and their intimate wear as unmentionables. Even the word corset is sometimes substituted with foundation garment, as if the object wrapped around your ribs, restricting your very breath, is too private to be named directly. A certain respectable lady once admitted to severe hip pain during a social gathering with her stitching circle, and the host changed the subject so suddenly you would think she had uttered a curse. Yet that very discomfort hides something profound, a deep-seated fear of the physical self. The prevailing belief of the time is not simply about being well-mannered, it is about repression of feeling discomfort, of appetite, of desire, and even of your own anatomy. The very language you employ is meant to make you vanish, though never entirely. At dusk, inside your bedroom, with the curtains drawn and the lamp dimmed, you remove your shoes, your stockings, and your outer layers. You settle gently onto the carpet, stretching your lower limbs straight out ahead of you and examine them. Not nether portions, not the part beneath the knee. You deliberately flex your ankles. You feel the stiffness in your muscles from remaining standing all day. You stroke your hands along the length of the calves and whisper the correct term just once, solely for yourself. Leg. It is such an ordinary thing, a word uttered thousands of times daily by everyone else. Husbands, young fellows, staff, even animals have legs, but for you it is something reclaimed, a quiet defiance. You lie back completely on your rug, limbs relaxed, untucked, uncovered, and allow the stillness to encompass you. Not delicate, not poetic, just real. And somehow that feels considerably more dignified. It starts with a rapid look. A gentleman passes you on the walkway, a stranger in a tall hat. His expression is as sharp as the starch in his collar. Your eyes glance up by chance, just for a moment. You meet his stare, and instantly you have communicated something. Not a courtesy, not a gesture, not a sound, simply direct eye contact. But in the world you currently exist in, that is enough. Because within this society, a woman's line of sight is not neutral, it is charged. Every quick exchange of looks is either an insult, an encouragement, or an error. And the guidelines are inflexible. Virtuous women keep their eyes downcast. You immediately lower your eyes, your face flushing with the kind of shame usually reserved for actual wrongdoing. But it is already done. He noticed it, you are certain he did, and whatever he decides to believe, that incident is now out of your control. This is the instruction ingrained in you from youth. Decorum begins with the eyes. Do not fixate, do not pause, do not encourage. Direct your attention past men, never at them. A modest woman keeps her gaze soft, diverted, or safely directed downward. Even if a man speaks to you directly, your eyes should move like anxious butterflies. Glance in courteously, never holding steady for too long. A fixed gaze. That is what stage performers do. Or worse, women who behave like performers when not on a stage. Do you remember what happened at Mrs. Dunworthy's gathering last spring? One of the guests, a merchant's child with prominent eyebrows and a habit of speaking before thinking, laughed at something a young man said and held his eyes a moment too long, just a beat, but it went through the assembled group like a splash of spilled fragrance. By the end of the evening, someone hinted that she was too forward. By the following week, loose. By the next month. She was no longer receiving invitations to any function. Because a mere look, a single one, can be interpreted like a sensational news sheet, and that is what is so irritating. Men are permitted to stare. They are permitted to wink. They can evaluate you like merchandise in a catalogue and suffer no negative repercussions. But you must perfect the skill of remaining invisible while retaining your perception. You must observe everything while appearing to notice nothing. It is a demanding task. At the church, you are seated 2 rows behind a man who adjusts his collar every few minutes. You notice it, of course you do, but you do not look directly, not even when he turns to glance your way. Your eyes remain fixed on the hymn book, the flooring, the coloured glass. Anywhere but him. It becomes a proficiency, like fine needlework or dancing. You learn to recognise someone's approach by the rhythm of their steps. You can judge a man's mood by the angle of his hat. You perceive the nature of their interest in the way they utter your name, but you avoid meeting their eyes because your eyes are not yours alone. They are judged, filtered through the norms of the environment, the assumptions of others, and the overwhelming pressure of strict propriety. And most unfairly, if something unfortunate happens, if a man misinterprets your look, acts upon it, or starts a rumour, the fault lies completely with your morals. Because why were you looking at him in that manner? At your residence, even your mirror reminds you to maintain composure. Your mother once advised you that a young woman should practice her facial neutrality alone, just as she would her piano drills. Not to foster vanity, certainly not, but to guarantee your face communicates no feeling. A raised brow can imply disrespect, a slightly parted mouth suggests longing, and your eyes, they present the greatest danger of all, so you practice them in private. The gentle observation, the reserved flutter of the lids, the downward look, the kind that states, "I acknowledge your presence, but only to the extent that good manners allow." Never challenging, never completely exposed. And if fate is on your side, no one will ever accuse your eyes of conveying something your speech did not. Yet your eyes betray you. When a man utters a triviality in the reception room, you want to roll them, but you stop yourself. When a relative tells an unpleasant joke and expects your laughter, you want to narrow them, but you hold back. When the minister's son stares at you for too long at the full dance, you want to return a defiant glare. Instead, you blink once and look away. This continuous self-correction is draining, never stopping. You take it with you to every dinner, every social gathering, every walk along the garden path. Because to be observed, looking is just as compromising as being observed touched. You have heard the cautionary tales. One young woman in the county of Derbyshire supposedly offered a smile to a man on a train platform and met his eyes for an extended moment. He pursued her for several weeks, claiming it was a declaration of love. Her entire family had to move, not because she committed any offence, but because she had simply looked. And then there are the letters, the unwanted, unsolicited correspondence. I noticed you at the hat shop, one man once wrote to your cousin, and your eyes revealed more than your lips would dare. She had never exchanged a single word with him, never encountered him again. But he was convinced her eyes had promised something they never intended. But in this environment, a man's interpretation becomes the reality of your public standing. And that standing, fragile like stretched toffee, is entirely your duty to protect. With every intentional blink, the pattern solidifies. By the age of 20, you have perfected the detached, distant gaze. Your eyes always come to rest a fraction beneath a person's eye level, somewhere near their neckline. Just enough to appear engaged, but never enough to be misunderstood. You even begin to admire the women who perform the act flawlessly. Those who flutter their eyelashes with perfect timed precision, who can maintain a fixed smile with their mouth while their eyes remain empty, who never ever look a man directly in the face unless their intention is his total ruin. Because that is the strange truth of its power. When you do meet a man's eyes with clear intent, without hesitation, it transforms into a potent weapon, an unmistakable signal, a challenge so compelling that you yearn just once in your life to attempt it. And one day, perhaps you will. Maybe during a carriage ride with a lowered window, or in a corridor when you are completely alone. Perhaps with a person you will never encounter again, simply to discover what your eyes are capable of expressing when unrestrained. But not today. Today your glance remains humble, safe, unremarkable, because a proper young woman's eyes are not her own possession. They belong to public opinion. You're sitting at the dinner table again, this time at your uncle's country house, where the silverware weighs more, the whiskey runs deeper, and the invisible rules press harder. The table stretches so long you can barely make out what the guests at the opposite end are saying. Not that it matters. You're not meant to add to the conversation, you're meant to absorb it and offer a smile, maybe a light chuckle at the right moments. But don't speak unless a question is directed at you, and even then, your answer must be brief, pleasant, and entirely without edge. This isn't your first formal dinner. You've learned the rhythm under these constraints. The men do the talking, loudly, confidently, often with their mouths still full. They argue about Parliament, labour strikes, investment opportunities in India, or whether Darwin's theories should be banned from polite society altogether. They quote dead languages. They butcher Shakespeare. They toss opinions around, like apple cores. Never worried about how they'll land on you. You talk about the weather, the flower gardens, maybe the quality of the pastries, but only if someone else brings it up first. Because as a young woman, your role here isn't to drive the conversation, you're here to ornament it. Your voice is meant to add texture, never substance, and never, under any circumstances, should you cut off a man mid-sentence. The worst thing you can be called is overly talkative, even worse, opinionated. Your cousin showed both qualities at a dinner like this once. She offered a counter-argument to a gentleman's views on Irish independence. Her response was thoughtful, measured, even respectful. But you remember what followed. The complete stillness. The way the men froze, the way her own father cleared his throat and grabbed his glass too tightly. Afterward, her mother quietly told yours that she really must learn to moderate her tone. And so, you watch and you learn. You learn that when someone says something incorrect, you nod politely. When someone says something outrageous, you make a soft sound of acknowledgement. And when someone says something genuinely brilliant, you laugh quietly, even if you don't quite understand it. You become skilled at vague verbal placeholders. How interesting. I hadn't thought of that. Quite so. You learn to speak without actually saying anything real, and to keep your actual opinions tucked away in the same private corner where you store your unsent letters and postponed dreams. You're not stupid, not at all. You read novels with complex heroines. You know which countries are at war and why. You secretly understand the basics of bookkeeping from helping your brother. But none of that intellectual currency counts at this table. You have too much mind for your own good, and smart young women don't get invited places or offered marriage proposals. You reach for your wine glass and take a measured sip. Never too much at once. A lady never drains her glass. You dab your lips lightly, not because they need it, but because it gives you a second of quiet thought. Part of you wants to jump in, to say something relevant, to tell a sharp story, to prove that you too are a real thinking human being. But you don't. You let the conversation wash over you like cold water, unnoticed, weightless. Because a lady's words are meant to be like perfume, faint, pleasant, and never overpowering. As the meal moves forward, fish, then meat, then elaborate custard-layered desserts, you begin to notice how easily the men own the space. Their voices build bridges across the length of the table, while yours are supposed to stay folded neatly in your lap like your napkin. At some point, a gentleman speaks passionately about the power of steamships and their potential for dominating the Far East. He talks about the colonies as if they were wild creatures waiting to be tamed. You know from your own reading that the reality is far more complicated than he's making it sound. You know names, dates, existing trade routes. You could ask a sharp question that would make him pause. You could drop a single factual statement that would make him rethink his claim. But your aunt once told you, darling, it's not that your ideas aren't valuable. It's that men don't come to these gatherings looking for intellectual challenge. They come expecting approval, so you give approval, or at least you perform it. You give your most convincing nod. You murmur softly, how very fascinating, even as your hands clench into tight fists beneath the tablecloth. And that's the heart of it, isn't it? This isn't real silence. It's a kind of performance. But not every woman executes her part convincingly. There was a young woman 2 seasons ago named Clara, daughter of a respected lawyer. At a formal luncheon, she laughed politely at a gentleman's misquotation of Aristotle and corrected him with grace and warmth. She even apologized afterward. But it didn't matter. Word spread. They called her embarrassing, inappropriate, overly educated, which in your world is considered only slightly better than being morally compromised. She's no longer asked to gatherings. Her dance card went blank within a month, so you keep the memory of Clara stored carefully in your mind like a dried, pressed flower, vivid but fading, a necessary reminder. Later that evening in the drawing room, the men continue their debates. Their voices drift from behind the closed study door, heavy with cigar smoke and unfiltered declarations. You and the other women are arranged in a careful semicircle near the piano. Someone plays a gentle, meandering melody. Another woman works on needlepoint, quietly stitching flowers onto the corner of a handkerchief. You glance around the circle, and a cold realization hits you. Nobody is talking about anything meaningful, not really. There's conversation, yes, but it's carefully trimmed and shaped like delicate lace. No sharp edges, no disagreement, no passion. Just pleasant, soft topics. The weather outside, the new dog next door, a dress seen in a shop window. Nothing that might risk upsetting the quiet, fragile balance of the evening. You catch yourself wondering, what would happen if you stood up and said something true? I disagree entirely. Or, I read something in a newspaper today that moved me profoundly. Or even, I have a real question. But of course, you stay seated, because to do that would not only be bold, it would be deeply destabilizing. It would rip the social fabric everyone has been carefully trained to stitch so perfectly. And yet later, alone in your room, your voice comes back. You speak freely, even if only to yourself. You debate with an invisible opponent. You laugh without holding back. You imagine what it would be like to say things exactly as they are, not as they're supposed to sound. And you whisper, just loud enough for the silence to catch it. I actually have something original to say. Nobody interrupts. Nobody corrects your phrasing or your content. And for one brief moment, your voice belongs entirely to you. You're standing in the parlour, gloved and perfectly still, waiting for the introductions to finish. A distant male cousin has just arrived from Kent, recently back from his travels abroad, having seen the world. And, judging by the way everyone defers to him, he's clearly a man of importance. The room's attention shifts toward you. Names are exchanged formally. He gives a polite smile. And then comes the awkward moment of uncertainty, the handshake. But you don't move. You don't offer your hand first. You wait. Because in this elaborate Victorian social choreography, you must never ever be the one to extend your hand to a man, even if you've met him before, even if you're genuinely glad to see him, even if your palms are sweating inside your fine kid gloves and every instinct in your body wants to reach out. You wait. If he offers his hand, you're allowed to reciprocate. If he doesn't, you simply smile and nod and hide the sting. This particular rule was drilled into you as early as your multiplication tables. A lady never initiates physical touch, not even the most innocent kind. The risk is too high. A handshake can be interpreted as too much familiarity, or worse, as being presumptuous. And being presumptuous is the start of the slippery slope that leads, inevitably, to ruin. Your brother, though, shakes hands with everyone he meets. Men, women, shopkeepers, beggars, lawyers. His grip is supposed to be strong, a sign of character, a demonstration of his confidence. Yours must be delicate, purely symbolic. A response, never the initiative. Do you remember the story of Aunt Imogen? She once offered her hand first to a visiting minister, not boldly, just as a polite gesture. But he pulled back, visibly shocked. He said something about how modern times were changing. Later, he mentioned to someone that she had seemed overly eager. The label stuck to her like ink for months. So now, whenever you're introduced to a man, whether he's a clergyman or a banker, you keep your hand close to the folds of your dress. If he greets you with a nod, you give a small curtsy. If he offers his hand, you lift yours gently and let it rest like a feather in his palm. Never squeeze, never hold on. The glove, in this moment, does more than just cover your skin. It acts as a boundary, a quiet statement. I am untouchable, not available, not asserting any claim. And yet this tiny, restricted gesture contains entire worlds of meaning. There are women who know how to manipulate this ritual subtly, who extend only their fingertips and glance away coldly, signalling indifference. Others who let their hand linger a fraction too long, suggesting hidden attraction. It's all performance, carefully rehearsed in private, perfected in finishing schools and sitting rooms, judged instantly and without mercy. And if you slip up, if your fingers are too chilly, too clammy, ungloved or too assertive, you're immediately categorized. You're no longer a lady. You're something far less respectable entirely. After the handshake moment passes, you feel a wave of relief through your entire body, like a curtain dropping on a stage. You followed the rules successfully. You didn't embarrass your aunt or your mother or the long chain of silent women who came before you. Still, the question lingers. How odd it is that something so small, the offering of a hand, can hold such enormous social consequence. You move to the side of the room, pretending to admire a vase of flowers while the men discuss railway schedules and tariff rates. Your hand, still tucked neatly at your side, trembles with unused energy. Sometimes you imagine what it would feel like to be the one who reaches out first, to walk into a room, hand extended, completely assured and bold, to grip another hand as if it truly meant something. Not just polite ritual, but a real acknowledgement of shared humanity. But young Victorian women don't reach out first. They wait patiently. You remember clearly a particular afternoon tea at Lady Winthrop's house, whose household customs were more rigid than any chapel service. A young woman visiting from America had come, and upon introduction she extended her hand to the hostess's oldest son directly and with confidence. You can still see the boy's eyes going wide, not with anger, but with such pure shock that his monocle fell straight into his tea. The whole room went dead quiet. Later, someone suggested that the girl must have been raised in commercial circles. Others whispered ominously about crude manners from across the Atlantic. She was never invited back. You wonder what happened to her. Maybe she found joy in marrying someone who appreciated her boldness. Or maybe she's still out there somewhere, still moving through social situations elsewhere, reaching confidently into spaces where hands usually remain unheld. Back in the present, the talk near the edge of the room changes. A gentleman turns toward you. He gives a polite nod. You nod back. That's the entire social interaction. You'll be praised later for your proper restraint. It's not that you dislike handshakes. It's that handshakes belong to men. A handshake suggests equality, even the smallest bit of it. It's, after all, a greeting between peers, a mutual grip, a brief connection of two separate beings. And you're not his peer. Not here, not now. Instead, your hands are for receiving gifts, correspondence, and wedding bands. They're meant to be looked at, not deployed, softened with rose water, covered fully by gloves, resting quietly on your embroidered lapcloth. They're supposed to stay perfectly still, but you imagine now and then all the power your hand could hold if it were just permitted, not in the forceful crushing hold of a man's grip, but in a calm, steady gesture, one that says, I am present here, I recognise you fully. I decide this for myself. Maybe someday, in some far-off future time, women will walk into spaces and offer their hands right away, leading the exchange, not from boldness, but from the certain understanding that they have every right to do so. Until that far-off time comes, your handshake stays figuratively tucked away, hidden, and perpetually waiting for approval. You're sitting at your desk, the fading afternoon light pouring through your delicate lace curtains. An unfinished letter lies before you. The paper is a deep cream shade with sharp edges completely smooth. A faint scent of dried lavender is woven into the paper itself. Your pen hovers just over the surface and you hesitate. Not because of the precisely selected words, those were carefully crafted in your thoughts throughout the whole morning. You're hesitating because of the shade of the ink. You instinctively reach for the standard black container. Dependable, traditional, anticipated. But positioned right next to it, almost gleaming in the filtered light, is another option. Violet ink. A small glass bottle given to you as a present by your adventurous cousin, brought directly from Paris. It holds the soft scent of spring blossoms and a touch of rebellion. You desperately want to use it. You picture how the graceful curves of your refined handwriting would flourish in that gorgeous purple tone, how it would instantly set your letter apart. Lovely, vivid, completely contemporary, but you don't reach for it. Because in proper society, a woman's written letters are examined not just for her accurate grammar and tidy penmanship, but also for her tasteful restraint. And violet ink? Much too sentimental, overly playful, too conspicuous. The socially approved colours are incredibly restricted. Black is for official matters and preserving complete propriety. Brown is sometimes permissible for casual personal notes. Between close family, blue is regarded as a bold selection. Red is exclusively meant for marking editorial changes, if it's employed at all. Anything that is perfumed, decorated with sparkle, or vividly coloured, well, that is an entirely different matter altogether. A message written in violet ink might be deemed charming in a cultured Parisian salon, but here inside English parlours it verges on the realm of impropriety, not because of the actual message you intend to express, but because of the visual means you employ to express it. You recall the widely known story of Miss Jane Tilling from the town of Exeter. She carefully wrote weekly letters to her fiancé while he was stationed in Calcutta. But one letter arrived, written in brilliant green ink, a bold, sweeping script on heavy lilac-coloured paper. His mother chose to open it first. The official engagement was suddenly cancelled within 1 month. No one ever directly mentioned the reason why. They didn't have to. The selection of stationery and ink communicated far more than the real content of the letter. Your own mother once purposely burned a note delivered by a woman who used pink-tinted paper and fastened it with a violet-coloured wax. "It smells of desperation," she stated, throwing it into the flames with a graceful flick of her wrist and deep disapproval. So, you carefully dip your pen into the black ink well. The ink clings to the metal tip with the cold weight of total obedience. You write deliberately and with extreme care. The necessary tone must be pleasant but not childish, warm but not bold or presuming. You purposely avoid using exclamation points. You think about and then instantly dismiss the word darling as being much too familiar. You settle on "my kind regards" and consciously refrain from underlining anything. Your personal penmanship, once deeply expressive and full of dramatic loops in your private journals, is now controlled and carefully readable. It must not imply an intellect that is too imaginative or chaotic. It must convey a peaceful, entirely predictable, flawlessly feminine quality. Because within the limits of Victorian etiquette, a written letter is much more than a basic piece of communication. It is a visible display of your deepest character. And your character, if it hopes to obtain an advantageous marriage or be regarded with intellectual seriousness, must be carefully composed and inked in black, properly sealed in wax, with completely no hint of violent passion or uninhibited artistic expression. When the letter is finished, you softly apply a clean blotting paper. No stray smudges, no revealing fingerprints. You fold it with careful precision into thirds, making sure you avoid the crease that might somewhat misalign your closing polite sign-off. You select a perfectly matching cream-coloured envelope. No fancy embossing, no ornamental decorations. Only your initials in tiny, almost invisible gold lettering. Now comes the critically important seal. Your personal seal is plain, a small round impression featuring a simple forget-me-not flower design. Blue wax is acceptable if the tone is muted. Red wax carries considerable risk unless the letter expresses genuine condolences or pressing business matters. Pink wax is strictly meant for women of dubious moral character. You have heard the troubling whispers that a letter sealed with pink wax once led to a woman's invitation to the Queen's garden party being formally withdrawn. No one could ever conclusively prove it was the letter, but no one really doubted the story either. You press the seal hard into the warm wax and wait for it to harden. You hold the sealed envelope as if it were an extremely delicate object, because it is, quite literally. This basic piece of paper can carry deep affection, social ruin, serious misinterpretation, or a life-changing marriage proposal, and every tiny detail, the ink shade, the seal mark, the spacing of the words, the grammar, is completely open to severe judgment. Later, at the designated postbox, you watch other letters being dropped inside. One is noticeably wrapped with a pale yellow silk ribbon. Another carries the faint remaining scent of rose oil. You don't need to see the names of the senders. You already know precisely what polite society will say about the women who sent them. She is quite the daring one. I hear she openly reads French novels. Does she not have any male relatives to give her with proper guidance? Because Victorian letter writing is not simply a common domestic chore. It is a carefully orchestrated performance of femininity, precisely constructed and ruthlessly edited. It represents the single space where you are officially allowed to speak freely, but only if you strictly adhere to all the established rules. One girl within your social circle, Elizabeth, with a naturally quick smile and constantly ink-stained fingertips, writes almost exclusively in green ink. She frequently claims it reminds her of springtime moss, new growth, and fresh intellectual concepts. She once sent a manuscript to a publisher, submitting a poem written in vibrant green ink on light blue paper. The publisher returned it to her unread with an attached note. "We do not review eccentric submissions." She wept, not because her poem was rejected, but because the colour choice had been judged more harshly than the literary content. And this is the undeniable lesson that is painfully inscribed into your hand with every single letter you compose. You may experience deep emotions, you may entertain wild dreams, you may intensely desire to express something completely genuine. But your words must be dressed appropriately, with complete modesty, with total predictability, and in the colour black. You gently tuck the sealed envelope into your small basket and carry it out to the street corner for mailing. As you walk, you reflect on the letter itself. How extremely careful, how severely restrained it is, and how much essential truth it deliberately omits. How it removes your small, beautiful observation about the way the garden looked in the morning sunlight. How it entirely bypasses the line of poetry you desperately wanted to include but feared would be perceived as too suggestive. How it effectively conceals your profound excitement, your deep nervousness, your fragile hope. It is undeniably a polite letter. Perfectly executed, truly. It expresses everything you are socially permitted to say, but not a single solitary word of what you actually feel. You're crossing the town square when a sudden, unexpected gust of wind rushes around the building corner, pulling insistently at your bonnet ties and lifting the lower edge of your outer skirt just high enough to reveal the decorative lace of your undergarment. Your hand immediately flies up out of pure instinct to correct the visible mistake. But then you suddenly remember you are standing in a public space, and in the strict conventions of Victorian England, Actively adjusting your clothing where others can clearly observe you is nearly as scandalous as intentionally exposing what is underneath, so you instantly freeze in place. You let the unpredictable wind continue to tug at your bonnet for just a fraction of a second longer, forcing your fingers to remain hovering suspended in the air, caught between the absolute demand for modesty and the social requirement for restraint. Ultimately, you select the latter. You slowly lower your hand, deliberately straighten your posture, and project the illusion that the unexpected wind has not disturbed your composure in the slightest. It's not that you are strictly forbidden from making adjustments to your appearance, of course. Everyone knows that. Pins occasionally slip, cuffs inevitably twist, bodices naturally shift. But actively acknowledging it, reaching down to forcibly tug a stocking straight, quickly tightening a glove fastener in full view, urgently pulling at your corset lacing, or clearly readjusting your skirts while on the street. That behaviour is simply vulgar. A lady's outward appearance must always be projected as entirely effortless. That was the wisdom your aunt always imparted. She should look as if absolutely no part of her elaborate ensemble requires ongoing maintenance. As if your bonnet never slides slightly askew, as if your gloves never become loose, as if your corset never binds or rotates or painfully digs into your ribcage. Even profound physical discomfort must be endured. It must be endured with absolute grace. You once witnessed a woman being sharply reprimanded for subtly adjusting the strap of her shoe while she was seated on a public park bench. It was an insignificant action, rapidly performed and entirely necessary, but someone observed her bare fingers momentarily touching the leather near her ankle. They harshly described it as a most indecent moment. She didn't even look up from her lap. Afterward, she simply folded her hands in her lap and pretended her shoe still fit perfectly. So, you obediently perform, as you have been taught. You permit the lace to flutter marginally in the current breeze. You hold your chin elevated a little higher, pretending your bonnet is not slowly sliding backwards. You walk forward slowly with great deliberation, fighting the powerful internal urge to tug, to straighten, to tuck, or to pull anything. And once you've successfully rounded the corner, finally slipping from clear public view, you quickly duck behind a convenient brick archway. You fix absolutely everything in undoubtedly less than 10 seconds. Your fingers rapidly work over buttons and tiny fastenings. You hastily shake out your skirts, readjust your tight collar, smoothly flatten the rebellious strand of hair near your temple. Then you step back into public view, completely composed as if absolutely nothing ever needed immediate attention. Because that is the essential unspoken truth. A Victorian lady must project an image of perfect, unwavering composure, even if absolutely everything is precariously coming undone beneath the carefully draped fabric. The fabric. You have heard terrible stories from the opera house. The woman whose corset boning suddenly fractured mid-performance and slipped sideways underneath her silk gown. She was forced to spend the following 2 hours completely motionless, paralysed by the fear that if she moved even slightly, the entire elaborate dress would immediately collapse like a tent when its main support pole is suddenly removed. She maintained a perfect smile throughout the entire ordeal, and no one ever truly knew the terror she endured. For despite how awkward or restrictive or untidy, or simply how human you may feel beneath your garments, you are obligated to keep up the appearance of flawless composure. Always. Upon returning home, your maid assists you in undressing. She unfastens the multitude of hooks down your spine, lifts away the numerous layers of underskirts, and slides the fitted top from your shoulders. With the shedding of each piece, your posture relaxes just a little. Your hands are no longer glued stiffly to your sides. Your shoulders stop resembling fragile porcelain. You sigh. Your maid notes your corset was twisted as she loosens the laces. They must have shifted around midday, she murmurs. You nod. You recall sensing the twist deep beneath your ribs right after tea when the binding first started to chafe. Yet, what choice did you have? Not in the thoroughfare, not in the dry goods store, not even within the privacy of Lady Hobson's retiring room. There is no discreet space for fixing one's attire in a woman's public existence. Only unseen discomfort endured in complete silence. Even reflections can prove misleading. You have learned to rely more on instinct than on glass. The slight slipping of a skirt band, the painful dig of a twisted stocking garter, the internal panic of a bonnet strap that is too tight but cannot be adjusted until you are alone. Because making any adjustment is to acknowledge the physical body, and admitting to having a body means recognizing that it moves, chafes, perspires, itches, swells, cramps, and fails to maintain perfection. And the rules of Victorian etiquette are founded on the belief that a lady, if properly trained, will appear untouched by these earthly failings. You frequently recall the woman at the theatre whose long glove came unbuttoned at the wrist. She spent 20 minutes keeping her hand motionless, wrist slightly turned, so that the loose leather flap would not reveal her predicament. She never corrected it, never attempted to touch it, simply endured. Some called that poise. Others, self-sacrifice. And you understand both perspectives. There is a strange dignity in the strictness, a certain perverse pride in knowing how to keep everything contained, even as, secretly, your stocking is sliding down your calf and your tightly laced undergarment is pressing into your side like a rival sibling. But you also wonder what would happen if you simply straightened something openly. Nothing shocking, just a gentle pull, a subtle adjustment to a shoulder seam, a quick pat at your hip where the back padding has begun to droop. Would the world genuinely collapse? Or would it gasp first? Would it observe with disapproval and declare, "How improper"? Then go home and contemplate what other audacity a woman like you might attempt. For deep down, everyone grasps the true purpose of these rules. To make certain you do not appear to exist, to keep you placid, still, composed, to guarantee you move through life like a piece of art displayed on a wall, admired, preserved, but never permitted to stretch or yawn or redistribute your own weight. So this evening before retiring, you stand by the window, you scratch your shoulder, you roll your stocking down, then pull it back up again just because you can. And it feels exhilarating, not because someone is watching, but because, for once, you are paying attention to yourself. The morning is remarkably bright. The street is quiet, the air cool enough to gently pull at the edge of your neck wrap. Your bonnet strings are tied in a flawless knot, your gloves buttoned at the cuff. Everything about you is neat, suitable, proper. Yet, as you exit your front gate without an escort, you sense it immediately, the shift in the atmosphere. It makes no difference that your destination is only 4 blocks away. It does not matter that the time is respectable, that you walk with decorum, that your shoes are clean. It is even irrelevant that you are not going anywhere inappropriate, only to the seamstress for a finished sleeve. All that matters is that you are female, you are in public, and you are by yourself. In Victorian life, that combination invites scrutiny. Because walking unescorted without your mother, your servant, your brother, or a married friend is not merely inconvenient, it is suspect. You pass a policeman and lower your eyes, not due to any wrongdoing, but because he is already looking at you longer than is courteous. His gaze follows you like a loose thread. 2 ladies carrying parasols glance in your direction from across the street. One whispers something to the other. You catch the slight lift of an eyebrow, then a quiet laugh. Your steps become slower, a result not of fear, but of careful calculation. Every intersection becomes a spotlight. Every person passing becomes a potential witness or judge. Because society has long agreed that a lady without an appropriate companion must have questionable intentions. She might be meeting a male admirer. She might be selling some unspoken thing. She might simply be too self-assured for her own well-being. And that final insinuation, it clings to you like soot. Your instructor once told you that a woman's character is judged not only by her actions but by how she is perceived, and reputation, in the eyes of the Victorian world, is as delicate as spun sugar. You reach the corner and pause near a line of carriages. A gentleman briefly lifts his hat, perhaps in politeness. You offer a slight smile and nod just enough to be civil, not enough to encourage anything further, but internally a knot of anxiety tightens between your ribs. You should not be doing this. You should not be here unescorted, visible to all. If anything untoward occurs, anything at all, it will be your fault. Even the town layout reinforces this idea. No public benches for women to rest alone. No respectable places where you can stop without attracting notice. Even shop owners sometimes hesitate to serve you without a chaperone present. You have heard of women denied entry, or worse, mistaken for working girls simply because they arrived on foot and without company. There was that story, wasn't there? The widow who dared walk to the pharmacy alone after the sun had set. A man followed her home, told his friends, and within the week, no respectable person would call upon her again. She relocated before the social season ended. She had only wanted to purchase cough drops. You arrive at the dressmaker's shop and step inside, the door chime sounding softly behind you. For a brief moment, you inhale deeply. You completed the journey. No one spoke to you. No one followed. But still, you feel it. That residual sense that you have done something almost defiant. Though the act itself, merely walking, should require no defiance whatsoever. The assistant greets you with a friendly look, but there is a fleeting flicker of surprise in her eyes. "No companion today, miss?" You respond with a casual remark. "Only myself this time," you say, trying to avoid sounding awkward. She nods, but the moment is strained. Even she, who likely walks alone while running errands, sees your solo venture as noteworthy. That is the fundamental contradiction, isn't it? Working-class women walk alone constantly. They deliver goods, fetch items, and attend to tasks, but they are not expected to uphold their honour in the manner that you are. You are a lady, and the higher your status, the shorter the leash. Because for a Victorian woman, respectability does not reside in her intellect or even in her home. It resides in her visibility, or more precisely in her lack of visibility. You are not meant to be observed wandering. You are meant to be guided, and should any misfortune befall you on this outing, perhaps a man speaking to you too casually, or being seen turning down a street with no respectable purpose, the rumours will start, and they will not stop. This is why so many women depend on chaperones. Elderly relatives, governesses, even younger siblings, forced into service to act as human shields. The chaperone is not solely there for your protection. She is there to verify your conduct. If anyone sees you, they see two women, not one. One to complete the journey, the other to stand as proof that nothing improper took place. You have heard of men following unaccompanied women not to cause harm but to scrutinize them, to gather just enough information for idle gossip. Who was she meeting? Did she hesitate at that doorway? Did she look at him for too long? And what if you were to fall? Just imagine tripping in the road, skirt crumpled, glove stained with mud, bonnet askew, a man helping you rise. A conversation, a brief touch, and no chaperone to provide an account. In that single instant you become a story circulated by others, a whisper that travels faster than you ever could. You settle the payment for your altered dress and prepare to leave, but you pause. Returning the way you came feels exposed. You consider taking a different route, less busy, less observed, but then you recall the stories. A woman seen taking a shortcut through the narrow alley near the baker's shop. A woman noticed behind the church grounds. A woman overheard sharing a laugh with a man close to the coach stable, each one penalised not with a fine but with social erasure. Invitations cease. Messages go unanswered. You become that sort of girl without anyone stating exactly what you did wrong. So you choose the familiar longer path home via the most populated streets, past the windows you recognize. You walk with your back straight, your expression composed, your pace measured and ladylike. Not too fast, not overly determined. You must appear as though you are not deliberately trying to be alone. And when you arrive at your gate and step inside, unnoticed by anyone, only then do you allow yourself to breathe naturally. You walked 4 blocks by yourself, and no one can undo that accomplishment. But tomorrow you will bring your sister, just in case you are running late. You're running late, not disastrously so, just enough that your pulse quickens with mild panic. The dressmaker shuts her doors precisely at noon. Your bonnet is already tied, your shoes buttoned, the parcel you swore to drop off tucked firmly beneath your arm, and yet you walk. You don't run, you don't hurry. You walk, because in Victorian England, a proper woman never runs. Even when time is slipping away, even when the sky is threatening rain, even when her little brother races ahead, gesturing wildly with both arms for her to catch up. She doesn't run. Because running looks frantic. Because running destroys grace. Because running makes things jiggle. And if there's one thing a Victorian lady must never do, it's jiggle. You recall the first time you saw someone running in public, a housemaid, maybe 16 years old, bolting through the back garden to catch a sheet that had torn free in the wind. Her hair came loose from its pins, her underskirts lifted at the edges. A stockinged leg flashed into view for a full second. Your governess went white. Shameful, she whispered, even though the girl hadn't noticed us watching. She'll never find decent work, she added. It wasn't the running itself that horrified her. It was what the running revealed. A woman with a body, a woman with urgent matters, a woman with an actual goal. Victorian society doesn't like its women having goals. Movement with intention is a kind of declaration, and running, racing, sweating, gasping for breath suggests far too much flesh. It implies a woman who isn't controlled, who isn't delicate, who might not comply when she's told. So instead, you walk quickly, but with measured steps. 1, 2, 1, 2. Your heels click softly on the cobblestones. You feel time bearing down on you, but you hold back, because running would be a worse offence than arriving late. Even your clothes conspire against it. Your shoes pinch at the front. Your skirts are multiple layers, weighty, designed to tangle if you move too fast. And your restrictive corset makes drawing a full breath nearly impossible. Try to run in a corset and you'll be winded in under 30 seconds. Try to sprint and you could faint, which is absurd because collapsing in public, as long as you do it elegantly, is far more socially acceptable than running. You pass a group of young boys kicking a ball back and forth. One dashes right in front of you, laughing freely. His knees are bare, his cheeks red from effort. Nobody scolds him, nobody frowns. They're boys. They're allowed to move however they want. You're not. Your movement must be decorative, not functional. You may drift, you may saunter, you may, at most, walk briskly but never sprint. You arrive at the shop just barely in time. The door is still unlocked and the owner glances up as you enter, slightly breathless but poised. You suppress the urge to double over and steady yourself. That would be inappropriate. Instead, you nod, straighten your gloves, and act as though your chest isn't screaming for a decent lungful of air. The reality is, the actual consequences of not running are small. You'll be a couple of minutes off schedule. You might miss someone by seconds. The real damage is internal. The slow wearing down of your agency each time you must choose appearance over necessity, politeness over speed. And this isn't just on city streets. Even in the countryside, even in your own back garden, you don't run. Not even when you want to chase the hound, not even when your hem snags on a bramble and you're left hopping ridiculously on one leg. Not even when it starts to pour and the first fat raindrop hits you square on the bonnet. You've been trained to value how you look above all else. You think of the running girl tales passed between women in hushed voices. Not the scandalous ones, just the strange ones. Disturbing, like the vicar's daughter who ran barefoot across the grass chasing a letter caught by the wind. Some say her ankle was exposed, others claim she giggled too loudly while running. Either way, the story ends the same. And after that moment, she was changed. Not ruined, just changed. Which in this world means the same thing. You've also heard about a young woman who tripped while rushing for a carriage. Her hat tumbled off, her corset twisted, and two strange men had to lift her upright. She never got a marriage proposal after that. It wasn't that she'd done anything wrong. It was that she'd shown too much of herself to the public. Running reveals things. It reveals shapes. It reveals desperation. It reveals that you're a human being, not a portrait. And that's the greatest crime of all. After picking up your altered sleeve, you walk home at a dignified pace. You feel the ache in your calves, the sweat forming beneath your stays, but you give a pleasant smile to the man who nods his hat. You keep your chin up as you walk past the same two ladies from before. You're polite, unhurried, ladylike. But later, when you're alone in your bedroom, you kick off your shoes, strip away your corset, and run. Not far, just laps around the floor rug, skirts bunched in your fists, hair tumbling loose down your back. You don't run with elegance or style. You run with the awkward pleasure of someone remembering what it feels like to move because you want to. Nobody sees, nobody judges, and in that short, gasping circle, you take back the one thing you were never supposed to have. Purpose. You've just heard something genuinely funny, not just mildly amusing, not worth a polite giggle. Actually laugh out loud funny, the kind of thing that catches you off guard, surprises you completely, and requires a real, full-bodied laugh, not some pathetic little sound, but you hold it in. Because in Victorian society, a respectable woman's laughter must be soft, pleasant, and above all, contained. No snorting, no loud cackles, no trembling shoulders, no head tilted back, no embarrassing gulps for air. You press your lips closed and let the tiniest noise slip out. Something like a gentle, stifled sigh, a quiet mouth quiver, a hidden little titter, nothing more. Because here's the unspoken law that every woman knows. Loud laughter means low breeding. Even happiness must be carefully controlled. You learned this young, maybe at your first proper tea gathering. When you laugh too hard at your cousin's story about a rooster and the chimney sweep. A story so absurd it deserved no respect, but it still made you laugh. And your governess touched your arm gently, smiled thinly, and said, "Remember, my dear, a lady laughs with her eyes, not her throat." You never forgot that moment. Since then, you've watched yourself constantly. You've studied how the other women do it, how they cover their mouths with lace-trimmed handkerchiefs, how they duck their heads and murmur, "Oh, how clever," instead of actually laughing out loud, how even amusement must be filtered through layers of control. You've seen what happens when a woman forgets. At a garden party last summer, the rector told a terrible joke about a goat and a magistrate. It wasn't amusing, which was exactly why everyone laughed the appropriate amount, then stopped. Except for Miss Hargreaves. She laughed too long, too loud. She threw her head back and actually slapped her hands together. And immediately the atmosphere changed. Someone coughed. A gentleman muttered, "Good heavens." Her laughter rang out alone, awkward against the perfectly trimmed hedges. She turned scarlet. She went quiet. She wasn't invited back, because a woman's laughter, if too powerful, becomes dangerous. It suggests confidence, independence, or worse, agency. A woman who laughs without restraint might also talk without restraint, act without restraint, even believe without restraint. And Victorian society has no room for that kind of woman. It's not just about volume, it's about refinement. Good laughter shouldn't attract attention. It shouldn't suggest that you found something too funny or that you're too comfortable with whoever said it. You learn to adjust, to dilute your reaction, At gatherings, you perfect what you call the polite chuckle, a quiet sound with a small tilt of the chin. It communicates, "I heard that, I understood the joke, I acknowledge its existence," but it never shows how hilarious you actually found it. You've got entire rulebooks memorized in your head. If a man makes a joke, laugh, but keep it short. If a woman makes a joke, smile, but only if it's not cruel. If a servant says something funny, you didn't hear it. And if you say something funny, it's best to act like you didn't. Because laughing at your own humour is basically admitting to pride. You once laughed aloud at something you were reading, a satirical article in Punch magazine. It took you by surprise. The sound escaped before you could catch it. Your mother, stitching nearby, didn't even glance up. She just said, "Control that, darling." And just like that, you learned again that there's such a thing as too much joy, and it's not only your family. Etiquette books have whole chapters on the subject. One states that a lady's laugh should resemble the soft tinkle of bells in a breeze, present but never harsh. Another declares that any woman who laughs with her mouth fully open is unfit for respectable company. You start to notice how often men get the opposite treatment. Their laughter dominates parlours, echoes across open fields, rattles the dishes. A booming laugh makes them seem friendly, well-liked. For you, it would make you look common. There's even a label they use for women like that, the ones who laugh too freely, too openly, raucous. It sounds like a character flaw, and so when you feel laughter starting to rise like fizz in a corked bottle, you become an expert at turning it into something else. A grin, a soft hum, a well-timed cough. But later, when you're by yourself, truly by yourself, you let yourself remember. You think of a joke, maybe one your sister told, maybe something you saw on the street, a movement, a phrase, the sight of a duck following a constable, maybe. And you laugh, a real laugh. You clutch your stomach, snort without shame, toss your head back and let the sound fill your empty bedroom like a freed bird. It feels absurd and glorious and faintly rebellious. You laugh until your sides hurt, until your cheeks burn, until tears stream down your face. Then you slump back against the pillows, exhaling, not from tiredness, but because tomorrow you'll have to be silent again. You're at another supper. This one is quieter, more private, just family and a handful of your father's colleagues. The talk moves smoothly from farming to shipping lanes and eventually to matters of science. One man, a balding fellow with spectacles and the look of someone who collects odd fossils in his waistcoat, brings up the origin of species. You know the book immediately. You read it months ago by lamplight, well after everyone else had retired for the night. You remember the thrill of it, the radical idea that humans weren't special divine creations, but part of something older, changing, beautifully connected. You had to hide the book, naturally. Your mother found it once and scowled so deeply you feared her expression might stick. A troubling topic, she said. Inappropriate reading for a lady. And now, as this man talks about natural selection, survival and proof, you feel something ignite inside. You want to participate. You want to say, "I read that too. I thought it was brilliant. I have thoughts. I have theories." But you don't. Because in Victorian society, an educated woman must never speak confidently about science, politics, philosophy, or faith. And Darwin's book, that's the dangerous crossroads of all four. You're allowed to discuss poetry, certainly, watercolour landscapes, music that isn't too emotional. But biology, evolution, primates, human origins, that's not polite conversation, it's transgressive. You take a sip of your wine and listen intently. The men around the table debate the subject earnestly. Some voice doubt, others nod in agreement. One quotes the Bible, another raises an eyebrow and jokes something about ape-like traits in certain politicians. The joke doesn't land, but they chuckle anyway. Meanwhile, you sit completely motionless, your hands resting primly in your lap, your thoughts spinning, because you remember the chapter about the finches on those remote islands. how their beaks had shifted based on what food was available, how that single fact suggested time as the artist, not a divine moment. You remember feeling amazed, not because it was heretical, but because it made sense. Elegant, even. But here at this table, to say that would be to gamble everything. Your father's respect, your seat at the table, maybe even your prospects for marriage. Because a woman with firm opinions on science, particularly one that contradicts traditional religious teaching, is trouble. She isn't sweet. She isn't accommodating. She becomes that certain kind of woman, the kind who argues with men, the kind who reads too much, the kind who winds up unwed and publishing essays in journals under a false name. You could add to the discussion, but you won't, because in this space, intellect must be hidden, especially when it comes from you. The man opposite you presses on, animated now, jabbing his fork like a baton. He mentions rock strata, bones of vanished animals, and how the church is fumbling to address the ramifications. Someone snickers, another mutters. Well, yes, if we're all related to monkeys, that certainly accounts for my brother-in-law. The table laughs politely. You smile because that's your assigned function, but it's a hollow smile. You're not thinking about families or primates. You're thinking about how Darwin described the natural world. Not static, but shifting, not permanent, but slowly transforming across unimaginable stretches of time. And you wonder, not for the first time, what if everything demanded of you isn't permanent either? But you don't say it because intelligence in a woman is viewed with distrust, and intelligence combined with controversial ideas is downright threatening. You've heard about women who stepped over that line. Mrs. Devereux, an acquaintance of your mother's, once voiced her thoughts on the heliocentric system at a dinner in Bath. She discussed planetary motion and the shift from divine design to cosmic accident. She never married. Not because she was unlovable, she was strikingly attractive, but because, as someone once said, she holds beliefs that are too profound. Another woman you know, barely older than you, was caught reading Darwin and making notes in the margins. Her betrothed called it a defect in her nature. He broke off the engagement. She now works at the community library and says very little. They called her intellectual, not as praise. That's the part that stings. Your mind buzzes with curiosity about science, about reality, about where you stand in this precisely ordered society. But none of it is allowed, not allowed. Not if you want another invitation, not if you want to stay safe. So you create systems of hiding. You tuck your books behind needlework baskets. You scribble thoughts in coded personal journals. You study philosophical texts only when your servant is cleaning the front chambers. And when someone mentions science, as they do tonight, you maintain a calm expression, agree when expected, and bury your real thoughts deep in the cavity between your chest and your stays. But afterward, long past when the guests have left and the flames have dimmed, you go back to your bedroom, pull that weathered copy of The Origin of Species from under your pillow, and you read. Your lantern creates a soft glow. The room is quiet, and here by yourself, you are free to wonder. You follow a line with your fingertips. Endless forms, most beautiful and most wonderful, have been and are being evolved. And you feel something stir inside you once more. Not shame, not wickedness, just possibility. You shut the book and speak the forbidden name into the silence. Darwin. It does not sound threatening here. It sounds like freedom. You spot her on the other side of the street, your cousin Eliza. She has just stepped out of the millinery shop with a bright package under one arm and her hat tilted at a fashionable angle, looking absolutely glowing in the midday sun. Your first instinct is natural and instant. The urge to show recognition surges up. You want to raise your hand, shout her name out loud, give a quick, bright laugh, dash across the road and tell her how utterly terrible Mrs. Langford had been at lunch, and how the chicken was so dry it seemed made entirely of parchment. but your hand freezes halfway up. Your lips begin to part, then seal just as fast, because a woman of good breeding in Victorian society is prohibited from drawing public attention to herself. Even a simple hello is forbidden, especially any kind of waving or calling across a busy street. Such behaviour would be judged as vulgar, almost thoughtless, too noisy. And the meaning of that kind of description for a woman is obvious. It immediately changes her reputation from merely improper to completely without dignity. You look around. Several men are on the pavement, two in top hats talking about merchant business, a postman pulling letters from a rattling cart, and a governess leading two stiff, silent children along the cobblestone walkway. So instead of acknowledging her openly, you perform the approved action. You lower your head, a movement so subtle it is barely a small drop of the chin, the type of signal that could easily be mistaken as simply fixing the strings of your hat. Eliza walks past without seeing you, and just that quickly, the moment is gone. This is the silent rule, the one nobody directly instructs you about, but which everyone assumes you understand. A woman must never create sound on the street. Her presence should be faint, like a distant fragrance, noticeable only when someone is already close enough to be granted that access. As a child, you were repeatedly cautioned against shouting under any conditions when outside the house. Your own mother once saw a flower seller on the corner shout to her sister and whispered the word, "fishwife." What an utter disgrace. You did not understand what the word meant, but the harsh way she said it made your stomach tighten. You learned to walk without noise, to hold your parasol still, never swinging it, to ensure your walking shoes did not strike too loudly on the rough stones. You even taught yourself to breathe more softly if a man walked too close. And as for waving, that is clearly a fast route to social destruction, isn't it? After all, waving implies excitement, confidence, an inability to be restrained. More than anything, it implies an inappropriate degree of closeness, which for a Victorian lady is the most dangerous impression of all. Of course, there are minor exceptions. If you are sitting in a private carriage, rolling slowly through Hyde Park during the proper social hours, and you see an acquaintance from your finishing school, then yes, you may lift a gloved hand slightly, perhaps no higher than the throat. But the fingers must stay pressed together, the gesture slow and dignified. Not a real wave. It is more of an indication of awareness, like a small feather floating on a polite wind. However, to fling your hand above your head, to shout a name in pure delight, to rush toward them, that would be nothing short of social disaster. A particular story circulates through the tea circles like a dark lesson. A lady, actually a lord's daughter, was seen waving frantically at an acquaintance across the Royal Arcade. She even shouted her name a second time. The friend, totally mortified, acted like she did not see her. Witnesses traded sharp, critical looks, and by the close of that week the unfortunate woman was socially erased. No longer were there invitations to supper, no more places provided in carriages. Her mistake was too public, too easily witnessed. You often think about how much joy has been crushed by these restrictions, how many delighted shouts of hello have been choked back, how many arms have been lowered, half raised in eagerness, how many steps have been slowed when the desire was to run forward. You are not meant to question it, but you sense the cost of it in your muscles, in your voice, in the sharp sting behind your eyes, when you see a person you love and have to act like the sight means nothing. So instead you practice every possible encounter like a staged scene. If you meet someone in a public space, you are to approach them with quiet elegance. No abrupt movements, no loud voices. Once you are near enough, you may extend a greeting. But even then, only if their social rank is equal to or above yours. You must not begin the exchange if you feel unsure. It is all designed to eliminate spontaneity and spontaneous women. They are the ones who are never invited back. Your brother once asked playfully why you and your friends never shouted to each other the way the boys did. You answered, because we are not supposed to exist when we are outside the house. He laughed. You did not. Because underneath there is a thread of truth in that statement. The perfect Victorian lady is supposed to float, silent, cautious, intentional. She must never disturb the rhythm of the street, never yell across a store, never attract unwanted notice, even if that notice is from someone she treasures. So you nod, you give a faint smile, and you keep walking. And later, when you are home, alone in your chamber, you write a note to Eliza. Not a rushed message, but a proper letter. You detail the ribbon on her hat, the precise colour of the package held beneath her arm, the way the daylight caught her sleeve like a silk flame. And you finish it with, "Please forgive me for not saying hello. You looked radiant. I wish I could have shouted it." You fold it neatly, seal it with wax, and allow the written word to convey what your voice could not. The sitting room feels hot from the burning coal fire, and your hands are starting to sweat inside your fitted gloves. They feel uncomfortable around the wrists where the lace meets your skin, but you do not dare to adjust them, not yet. There are men here in the room, not only your father and brother, but also guests. Gentlemen in dark jackets with polished boots and neatly trimmed beards. One of them is already watching you over the rim of his fine teacup. You noticed his entrance with Mr. Atwell, the solicitor. He is reserved, observant, and has not stopped staring at your hands, which is exactly why they must stay hidden. Because according to Victorian standards of conduct, removing one's gloves in the presence of a man, especially a stranger, was often read as surprisingly personal, even potentially provocative. It is irrelevant that your gloves are too snug because of the warm weather. It is irrelevant that the seam cuts into your knuckles. It is irrelevant that your only desire is for your fingers to be free, to breathe. A lady knows that gloves signify much more than simple cloth. They are a barrier, a symbol, a performance, and taking them off, that is a deeply private act. There is a strange weight to that notion, isn't there? Something so basic, pulling back a bit of soft leather or delicate lace, could be seen as a move, a wordless offer. Some women, naturally, decide to defy this rule, the rebellious ones, or the American guests. You have heard stories about a widow in New York who removed her gloves during a dinner party, right in the centre of the first course. The hostess was so stunned she dropped her spoon. A gentleman coughed so hard he splashed soup down his waistcoat. You sometimes picture that exact moment, not because you are eager to cause such a scene, but because, well, you sometimes do wish to be rid of confining layers, of rules, of the constant, exhausting routine of knowing who is observing you and when, and how they might interpret your every small movement. But here in this carefully arranged English parlour, you are supposed to keep your hands covered, even though hands are what reveal your story, even though hands are what you use to stitch, to write, to scrub, to give comfort, even though the men sitting in this very room are permitted to display their ink-stained fingers, their coarseness, their wedding rings, their imperfections. You must stay wrapped up because the bare hand might show too much. The even deeper secret, of course, is that the act of removing a glove was not just personal, it was highly ceremonial. In certain phases of courtship, removing a glove was almost the equivalent of lifting a protective veil. It was a slow, intentional gesture that communicated, "I will let you see a part of me, only this much for now." Entire manuals were published describing the exact, proper method for glove removal. First the buttons, never just yank the fabric. Then, gently, finger by finger, each movement graceful and measured, never rushed. And heaven help you if you should bite the tip to work it free. That, apparently, was a gesture reserved for actresses, the type of women men spoke of in low voices but never considered marrying. You have seen paintings of women with just one glove removed, the other still on. It is always the working hand, the one used for formal handshakes. a subtle visual message that the woman was both available and still appropriately modest. A woman with both gloves off? That was for private viewing, for husbands or for artists whose brushes suggested scandal. Even in everyday public life, the formal ritual was preserved. At afternoon teas, gloves stayed on. At evening meals, gloves could be removed, but only after one was seated. At church services, gloves on until the moment of prayer. And if you forgot any of this, you were not just viewed as careless, you were labelled as improper. On one occasion, you attended an invitation to a small musical evening in a glass conservatory. You remember the amber light pouring through the glass ceiling, the sounds of the violins warming up, the fresh scent of crushed lemon leaves and waxed wood floors. And you remember, just before the first note, a woman nearby quickly pulled off her glove. The gentleman beside her stiffened slightly. Only his gaze moved. No one spoke, and yet the whole room seemed to pause. Was she trying to flirt? Was it a simple mistake? Was it an act of rebellion? That is the strangest part. No one would ever openly ask her because her intention was meaningless. All that mattered was how her action was interpreted by everyone else. And that is the law Victorian women lived under. Not what you mean, but what others decide to see. You once believed this rule was ridiculous. Now you realise it is something much worse. Deeply restrictive. Because sometimes on warm summer nights you would truly love to remove your gloves and let the cool night air reach your wrists. You would love to show someone the dark ink mark on your thumb from writing for hours. You would love to hold another person's hand not through a layer of cloth but really skin to skin and feel the firm pressure returned. But instead you give a courteous smile. You place your hands neatly in your lap, and when you are sure no one is looking, you gently flex your fingers beneath the glove, just to remind yourself that they are still yours. The moment arrives fast. Suddenly, you are at a packed garden party, attempting to balance a full cup of tepid tea in one hand and a delicate plate of bland cucumber sandwiches in the other. An older gentleman enters your small discussion circle, distinguished with the sort of thinning hair that suggests long wisdom rather than age alone. He speaks thoughtfully, in that quiet, confident tone that implies his views are naturally valuable. You tilt your head slightly, you smile, and without any consideration, you ask the completely forbidden question. "And how old are you, Mr. Lambert?" The effect is instant and complete. The lady standing closest to you makes a tiny cough that sounds almost rehearsed. Another woman stirs her teacup with unnecessary vigour. A third stares at her own gloves as if they have suddenly become detailed maps of the Alps. Mr. Lambert himself pauses for a beat, then forces a brief laugh, though it is the kind of hollow sound that does not touch his eyes. You understand too late that you have made a serious mistake in manners. Because, in this Victorian world, it was not simply rude for a man to ask a woman's age. The far more unusual rule was that women too were absolutely forbidden from asking a man's age, not even out of innocent curiosity, not even if the man in question appeared old enough to have personally spoken with Napoleon Bonaparte. Why? Because asking a man's age implied boldness, that you were evaluating him in terms of numbers, of hard facts, of his fitness. It was seen as doubting his strength, suggesting perhaps that he was too elderly or not mature enough for a particular role, marriage, government, business. You are meddling in matters that do not belong to you, and a lady must never appear analytical. The assumption is that you must float through your social existence with complete calm, with no sharp corners, that you quietly accept whatever is offered to you. Introductions, tea, sometimes a marriage proposal, without examining the package too carefully, even if you are dying to know what mysteries it contains. So instead you are trained to make observations, to estimate quietly. You are taught to judge age by the grey threads in his hair, not his birth date, by the way his joints complain when he bends to pick up a fallen item, by the old-fashioned cut of his vest, the faint stiffness in his stance when he dances, all without speaking a single word. It is especially odd, you think, that women were required to answer that same question repeatedly, at every formal meeting, at every dance, in every letter from a prying aunt. "How old is she now?" they would ask, peering through fancy opera glasses as if your face alone did not tell the tale. And yet you were never permitted to return the question. Because a woman's age was a measure of her value. A man's age, however, was a marker of his power. Ask a woman's age, and you are calculating her freshness, her prospects, her fading. Ask a man's age, and you risk revealing his weakness, the unstoppable march of time that no gentleman wants to admit. It was not just poor form, it was nearly an act of defiance. You recall your cousin Louise describing a terrible error she made at a formal dinner event. She had been placed beside a balding gentleman with wide, animated eyes who had introduced himself with an excessively grand bow. She thought it would be clever to joke with him. "Did you attend the great exhibition, Mr. Harland? Or perhaps you were there at Waterloo?" It was a harmless joke. She was only 17. But he did not smile. Instead, he turned his head deliberately and said, "A lady should not reference a gentleman's years, especially when she has so few of her own." Louise did not touch her dessert that night, and she never made a joke like that again. The obvious lesson was that your curiosity is risky, particularly when it is aimed at those higher than you in rank. Because in the rigid framework of Victorian gender and class, information was a form of control, and women were not meant to have it. A simple question, even one as harmless as, "How old are you?" could alter the power dynamic, turn a quiet glance into a harsh spotlight, and challenge a man's carefully constructed image. So instead, you commit yourself to mastering the skill of silent assessment. With a look of attentive interest, you tilt your head, offer a polite smile, let the men debate the Crimean War and gas lamps and the expanding railway system, and gradually piece together their life story from the scraps of their shared recollections. Sometimes you guess it entirely wrong, sometimes they shock you, sometimes you simply lose interest in the answer, but you never ask that question again, because in this world there are certain questions women simply do not have the privilege to ask, even when they know the answers, would be completely intriguing. You feel the pressure rising before you can possibly stop it. A sudden, sharp burst of laughter triggered by something absurdly funny that your cousin whispered just beyond the hearing of Aunt Marjorie. It catches you completely unprepared, and for a split second it breaks free. A real, deep belly laugh, the kind that makes your torso shake and your hand grip the armrest tightly. The entire drawing room goes silent. Only the soft clock ticking can be heard. Somewhere behind you, a fan slows its rhythm. And just like that, your unguarded laughter has become a public offence. Because in the overly structured, suffocatingly rigid world of Victorian standards, any public display of intense emotion from a woman, be it pure joy, fierce anger, profound sadness, or even basic affection, was considered to be dangerously close to mental breakdown. Hysteria, they would call it. A mark of bad breeding, a terrible loss of feminine restraint. Men were allowed to slam the table with their fists during political debates or roar boisterous hunting tales, but you must keep perfect control. Always. To laugh too hard, to cry in frustration, to raise your voice, even to cheer loudly, could label you as unstable, or worse, emotional. And being called emotional was code, not for frailty, but for something far more harmful, lack of reliability. So when your shoulders briefly shake with that laughter, you instantly bite your lips shut. Your hand shoots up too late to completely muffle the sound, and you feel the energy of the room shift. Eyes flicker away, teacups tap softly. No one openly acknowledges it, but every person saw. You are suddenly reminded of the disaster of poor Eleanor Langley. Her brother died suddenly in a fall from a horse, and when she openly wept at his funeral, gripping his coat to her chest and refusing to release it, She was quickly sent away for recovery, they said, to a rest home by the seaside. She had just turned 17. Months afterward, you caught whispered stories. She had outbursts, emotional collapses, people said. It started at the burial service when she couldn't keep the demanded level of control. That dark tale runs through your thoughts, even now as your laughter dies away. Because in this world, grief is only permitted if it arrives perfectly poised. Happiness is only welcome if it stays completely quiet, and rage is never allowed. The cruelest part of all this is needing to rehearse your feelings in isolation before you're permitted to reveal them in company. Grief must be controlled and neat. Pleasure must be diminished. Enthusiasm should be limited to a single lifted eyebrow or a gentle tap with covered fingers. Even love, that most basic human feeling, must be held back. You're maybe permitted a quiet breath out, a humble look toward the floor, but to weep when an engagement is offered? Too excessively theatrical. To glow when your intended walks into the space? Improper for a woman. To rush into his embrace after many days separated? That approaches vulgarity. You remember seeing in one of the countless manuals on appropriate behaviour on your mother's shelf that a truly polished woman is like a stretch of still water, peaceful at the top, even if violent tempests churn far below. So you become a skilled actor. You learn to explain a shudder as simple chilliness, to convert weeping into a sudden clearing of the throat, to step aside when your fingers start to tremble without control. And when real feeling does succeed in surfacing, when your tone momentarily falters or your breath catches short, you instantly hurry to fix it, to grin through the experience, to behave as though absolutely nothing has happened, because the result is not simply a bit of shame, it is the destruction of your standing. There is even a brief expression murmured at evening gatherings when someone creates a disturbance. She lost her composure. It sounds so refined, but you understand what it actually means. She lost command. She became frightening. She stopped being a secure person to wed. You once saw a woman fall apart in view of others at a presentation of all settings. A distinguished speaker had delivered a ridiculing remark about a female researcher, and she, possibly a pupil, stood and questioned his cruelty. Her face turned bright red. Her tone climbed steeply. It persisted only a handful of moments. She was quickly led out of the space. The speaker didn't even pause. He took a drink of water, then resumed his address. And the young woman, nobody ever spotted her at another presentation afterward. Because a woman who displays too much intensity is viewed as abnormal, too clever, too threatening, too furious, too unstable, too joyful, unreliable, too sorrowful, harmful. So today, when someone attacks you or compliments you, you give the same tiny, civil grin. You acknowledge them very graciously. You withdraw to a space of solitude until you are secure beyond a fastened entrance. It's there that you finally let go of what you are containing. Perhaps a muffled giggle into a pillow, possibly a quiet weeping buried in your cloth, or a tight, trembling exhale of annoyance. Because in this peculiar world, they've mistaken emotional control for goodness and somehow persuaded you that merely existing as yourself is a form of impropriety. The atmosphere is cold this dawn as you step out onto the walkway, your covered fingers folded neatly around a tiny bag, scarcely larger than a baked good. Your hat's edge protects your features from the morning light, yet you still notice him. An elderly gentleman, likely someone your household shared a supper with previously, possibly at Lady Thistlebrook's gathering. Your response is straightforward, entirely harmless. You lift your jaw slightly, the smallest recognition, a soft indication of having noticed him. But then the gentleman halts. He raises his hat in response. He begins to move in your path. Your breath stops, understanding you have just committed a terrible mistake, one so tiny, so genuinely human, and yet so perilously unsuitable in the rigidly established world of a Victorian woman's manners. You gave a nod to a man to whom you were not officially presented, and by this action you communicated not courtesy, not proper behaviour, but openness. In this setting, where every quick glance can be misread and every action examined, even a basic nod holds enormous significance. You have, by the unspoken rule of this world, extended a closeness that he has not deserved, and that, for a woman, is a genuine danger, because respectable women do not pursue notice, they quietly accept it. A nod at a stranger, and immediately you are no longer the image of restraint, the fitting silhouette concealed behind a fan. You become the young woman who gazes, the one who calls out, the one who quietly suggests being approachable. You look around rapidly now, sharply conscious of how such a moment could grow. Picture if it were your aunt who noticed, maybe watching from beyond a lace-decorated pane, or Mrs. Whipple's child, the one who packs her correspondence with the business of others. And more troubling, what if the gentleman entirely mistook your action? What if he chooses to trail you or tries to start a public exchange once more? Because proper conduct here is not simply about courtesy, it is about protecting yourself. One minuscule error could wrongly mark you, and this world is never swift to pardon. You think of a story you once heard, told in hushed tones by two elderly women organising blossoms in the church entryway. It was about a young lady from Sussex, honourable and properly raised, who once ventured to give a brief grin and a nod to a travelling army officer while stepping onto a railway car. No language was traded, no actual welcome extended, only a courteous dip of her crown. But that quick nod was observed by one individual, then relayed to another. And before the next 7 days had passed, her standing had shifted completely. Not because of what she had truly done, but because of how the account was passed along. They said she was too bold, that she recognised a gentleman she didn't know, and soon that she must have been privately meeting with him. By the time the warm months came, she was no longer welcomed to afternoon tea gatherings. By the full season, her identity had quietly vanished from the guest roster of a magnificent dance her own mother had assisted to plan. Because it wasn't the nod by itself, it was the secret interpretation attached to it. And once a woman was believed to be acting indecently, no quantity of pale gloves or present chaperones could ever completely erase the mark. You stare down now at your own protected hands and think about how such a slight action can possess so much influence. Even in the manuals on proper behaviour, this regulation is stated indirectly, wrapped in words like propriety and reserve, as if merely acknowledging a gentleman without official approval suggests some hidden agenda. The chain of logic implies a nod means you recognise him. Recognising him implies a background. A background implies closeness, and closeness in this time can only indicate something disgraceful. You find the whole matter amusing, yet dangerous. The absurd regulations are often the ones most fiercely upheld, and so you train yourself to glance beyond men rather than toward them. If a man raises his hat, you concentrate on the area above his shoulder blade. If someone meets your gaze on the crowded pathway, you adjust your hat ribbon and act to be captivated by a travelling coach. You become a master at evasion as a defence. Your existence becomes more confined, not because of written laws, but because of hints that have solidified into inflexible regulations. Regulations that command, don't talk initially, don't gesture, don't nod, don't seem to acknowledge anyone you haven't been officially presented to by title, because even the faintest nod can unlock a door, and once it moves open, you may never be capable to close it once more. It is washing day, and you are crouching near the hearth. You are arranging your private garments with the practised ease of someone who knows that even a single sock, particularly a sock, can decide a standing. You grasp for a set you have never dared wearing beyond your sleeping chamber. Delicate, rich crimson stitched finely, a gift from your cousin who journeyed to Paris and came back filled with radical ideas. You recall her confidential murmur mentioning that in France, ladies wear any shade, even scarlet, and nobody minds. But this is not Paris. This is England. This is Queen Victoria's realm. And here the incorrect tone on your lower leg could destroy your whole identity. You gently press the red set and place them back into the base of the storage box. Because here, even what is concealed under your skirts must follow the unseen requirements. Socks must be light white, ivory or grey at the most sombre. Anything more vivid suggests something questionable. In reality, to wear socks in red, green or blue was in particular groups to be charged with copying stage women. This was the courteous method of mentioning prostitutes or performers. It appears ridiculous today, doesn't it, that a touch of shade near the lower leg could suggest a blemish on your reputation. But this was the dominant reasoning of the period. Subdued shades equal modesty. Modesty equals goodness. Goodness equals suitable for marriage. And so socks became symbols, a hidden vocabulary woven into the fabric. A lady who wore vividly coloured socks might not be trustworthy. She might be wishing to draw notice. And in Victorian life, desiring to be seen was one of the most grave charges one could encounter. You recall once spotting a young lady at the rear of the chapel with green socks showing under her skirt edge for just an instant. Sufficient duration for the two ladies seated in front of you to press each other and tighten their mouths in judgment. No one dared say her name aloud, yet everyone understood exactly who she was. There's something nearly absurd about it, how something concealed, something never meant for anyone's eyes, could result in such severe consequences. But that was the peculiar genius of Victorian propriety. It governed not just what appeared in public view, but even the possibility of being noticed. You're sitting on your bed's edge right now, raising your dress hem just slightly to verify. Pale grey stockings. Secure, plain, unremarkable. Precisely how society wants its women to exist. Because colour in this situation isn't simply about fashion, it's about enforcing boundaries. A splash of scarlet implies rebellion. A bold pattern means you've abandoned your rightful place. And God help you if they spotted lace, decorative lace no less, on your calves that instantly ventures into dangerous territory. The moral panic over colourful stockings targeted young women especially, those who were freshly entering the marriage market, because brightness implied confidence and confidence implied danger. You remember an antiquated women's publication advising mothers to inspect their daughters' washing for any inappropriate hosiery, as though revolutionary spirits started at the feet. There's an intriguing tale you happen to hear at a cousin's ceremony about a young lady who chose lavender stockings for a summer afternoon gathering. The sort of gentle, understated lavender that complemented the ribbon adorning her hat. She believed she was being shrewd, stylishly matched, but when she positioned her legs just slightly too loosely, the lavender appeared, and before the week concluded, someone had written a cruel little rhyme about her that spread through every society parlour. Lavender legs and licorice lips, a girl with colour, a girl who trips. Nobody spoke it to her face, but she was noticeably excluded from the invitation list for the following 2 evening gatherings. So you discover quietly, carefully, you discover that true modesty isn't only about conduct, it's a particular palette, and your existence becomes a subdued painting of beige, ivory and subtle shades. Because the more vividly you present yourself, the greater your chance of attracting attention. And during this era, attracting attention is dangerous. The dawn light filters gently through your lace-draped window, creating delicate patterns across your vanity table. You're nearly entirely prepared. Gloves fitted, boots fastened, parasol properly arranged. You reach for the crucial finishing touch. Your hat. Not because it's stylish, although it is, not because of the chilly weather, although it is cold, but because to venture outside without a hat as a Victorian woman would be like departing your home partially dressed, even if you're simply stepping next door to deliver a modest basket of fresh pastries, even if you're hurrying to board the coach, even if you're merely standing on your own doorstep for some crisp air. No hat equals no respectability. In this society, your hat is beyond a mere fashion piece. It's a potent emblem of decency, a clear division separating ladies from everyone else. Without it, you risk being confused for someone of questionable character, or even worse, someone uncontrolled. Because an exposed head might indicate defiance, a challenging nature, or possibly a readiness to participate. And that final element, it holds enormous significance. The implicit understanding is plain. Decent women cover and guard themselves, their hands with gloves, their eyes with downcast lids, their opinions with measured quiet, and their heads with a hat. You recall when your younger cousin Martha rushed out to post correspondence, having misplaced her bonnet in her haste. A routine task, she figured. But she came back home, red with shame. A gentleman had acknowledged her with his hat, a stranger, mature, excessively forward, and inquired if she desired companionship during her stroll. The underlying suggestion was unmistakably clear. No hat, no male guardian, no safety. She was available prey. She cried in her chamber for 60 minutes, completely mortified. You verify the pins holding your own hat now, securing it with deliberate care. Because the convention isn't merely about social conformity, it's a protective tactic. The Victorian society functioned on the belief that a woman without her required ornaments was a woman without appropriate limits, and nothing established those limits quite so effectively as a correctly positioned hat. Your hat, though refined, functions as functional defence. Whether it displays feathers, velvet, or plaited straw, it's irrelevant. What counts is that it's attached securely on your head, like a courteous boundary marker. This woman possesses a social position. She's guarded. She's respectable. You've understood through the years that the hat accomplishes more than merely protecting you from sunlight. It safeguards your good name. Without it, you're not just exposed to the elements, you're exposed to harmful assumptions. In Victorian city districts, the women who travelled with bare heads were obviously identified as entertainers, domestics, or market workers. Their revealed hair branded them as ordinary. If you attempted to enter their category, even unintentionally, you faced an instant decline in standing. There's even a prominent ladies' article from 1879 that advises its audience, with stern conviction, a lady never permits her head to remain uncovered unless she's unwell, restricted to her bed, or securely beneath the sacred shelter of worship. How elegantly worded, and how utterly confining. You recall a strange story circulated among the house staff about a prosperous tradesman's daughter who resisted one springtime, resolved to walk without a hat as defiance. "My head isn't disgraceful," she announced boldly. She succeeded in walking 2 urban blocks before a gentleman confused her for a stage performer and presented an indecent proposition. She was guided home by a constable for her own protection, obviously. By that night, her father had bought her 12 fresh bonnets. The next morning, she displayed 2 of them, simply to be entirely certain. You observe your reflection in the looking-glass now, hat secured, bearing impeccably erect, your face composed. You permit yourself a slight hidden smile because you understand the reality. It was never simply a hat. It was a formal agreement between you and society, between acceptable behaviour and social danger. And as you move outside, hat fastened, steps controlled, gloves properly worn, you accompany innumerable other women advancing through time, not with arms or demonstration placards, but with petticoats and parasols, silently, gracefully surviving ridiculousness with required composure. You've successfully managed the morning. The hat is positioned, the stockings are appropriately selected, and your ankles, thankfully, stay properly hidden beneath multiple skirt layers. You can actually relax now, because you've endured another day in Victorian femininity, a day where the tiniest gesture, a brief smile, a simple head movement, the incorrect colour trim, was sufficient to generate gossip, trigger condemnation, or entirely destroy your reputation. And yet, despite all the foolishness, you preserved your composure, your eyes downcast and your hat firmly secured. That's no minor accomplishment. It's paradoxical, isn't it? How a culture so obsessed with decorum could establish regulations that are so completely exasperating. But there's a silent power in surviving all of that, preserving your standing in a society that continuously demanded you to recede. You accomplished what countless women accomplished before you. You provided a smile when it was required. You retained your intelligent observations to yourself, moved deliberately, acknowledged. Never, and never once permitted them to witness you trip over your hemline. But now you're comfortable in your own bed. No restrictive corsets, no constraining gloves, no invisible regulations suspended over you. Just you. The quietness of the evening, the gentle hum of a fan, maybe, and the reassuring understanding that you've successfully managed the day with every ridiculous rule still functioning beyond you. Close your eyes. Let the sounds of swishing skirts vanish. Let the velvet gloves fall from your fingers. Let the tedious etiquette manuals disintegrate into powder. Tonight, you finally receive your rest, and in the morning, nobody can prevent you from dashing barefoot through the grass in the garden.